It appears we just barely have a quorum. I think we have 5 members here, including Vice Chair Resman via WebEx. So I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Okay, are there any bill introductions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is committee member and staff introductions. There's Representative Poskin. It's good to see you there. We're going to go ahead and do our introductions, and let's start with some of the representatives that are online. Representative Resman, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Representative John Resman from the 121st District, which is the west side of Olathe and Lenexa. And this is my third year on the committee.
Representative Poskin. Did I say that right, by the way?
You did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Mary Lynn Poskin from House District 20, which straddles 435 covering Leawood and Overland Park, and we are butted up against Line Road. Thank you.
Representative Esau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Representative Charlotte Esau from Olathe, Lenexa area, District 14. K10 divides our district in half, and sorry about the feedback. And we very much care about K10 in our district.
Representative Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. Ron Ellis, 47th District, Jefferson County, and a little bit of Shawnee.
And our ranking minority member, Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Virgil Weigel, 56th District, which is south central part of Topeka. And this is my first time on this committee.
Welcome to the committee. You've got big shoes to fill after Representative Pittman last year, so we're looking forward to your service.
All right, thank you.
And I'm Representative Francis. I'm the chair of the committee. I'm from Liberal, Kansas, the southwest corner of the state, 350 miles from Topeka, where the yellow brick road starts, home of the Liberal BJs, on and on and on. Anyway, welcome to the committee. And then Alexis Simmons is our committee assistant this year. She'll be here to help you guys with any of your needs. Alexis, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, my name is Alexis, and I'm the committee assistant. If y'all need anything at any point during the session, you can feel free to give me a call or email me. My information is easily accessible on the Kansas Ledge website, and I'm here to help.
And then Chris Wagner, our revisor, would you introduce yourself? Wave so they know who you are.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Wagner here from the revisor's office. For those of you who aren't aware what we do, we handle any bill drafting, or I will also brief any bills that may come up in our committee, and then also provide any legal advice any of the legislators have. I'll be popping in and out of the committee as I'm needed, but feel free to contact me with any questions.
I see that Representative Dr. Victors has signed on. Congratulations on the doctorate, Representative Victors. And would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, you forgot me.
You were late.
Well, I was waiting, but nobody would let me in the virtual waiting room. But yes, it's an honor to be on this committee again. Representative Dr. Punkwe Victors from North Wichita.
Thank you, Representative Victors. And now I'm going to turn it over to our lead legislative research assistant, Aaron Clausen, and he can lead the introductions of our other budget analysts, and also if he wants to, our speakers today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I'll be one of 4 staff who particularly have agencies, and my name is Aaron Clausen, and I work for Legislative Research. I'm one of 4 staff members who will be working with you to go through the budgets that fit into transportation and public safety. And I'd be remiss here to not speak that my bosses are here with us as well. J.G. Scott, the Director of Legislative Research, as well as Amy Deckard, the Assistant Director for Fiscal Affairs. And I'll just let you know that I have the budgets of the Department of Transportation, the Board of Emergency Medical Services, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, the Kansas Highway Patrol, the State Fire Marshal, and the Adjutant General's Department. So just to let you know, if you have any questions about those particular budgets, please feel free to contact me. And hopefully you've been sent around that listing that has all the analysts that will be before you today. And also wanted to let you know, as a part of additional advice, I've been with the legislature since 2006.
And who would be next?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Merle Riedel. I am a fiscal analyst at KLRD. I handle the budgets for the Department of Corrections, the 8 adult correctional facilities, the juvenile correctional facility, the Sentencing Commission, and the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. This is my second session, so look forward to working with each of you, and I am happy to help you in any way I can. And I'll be followed by Martin.
Thank you, Merle. My name is Martin DeBoer. I am a fiscal analyst with the Legislative Research Department. Before you, I will have the budget of the Board of Indigent Defense Services, and this is my second session, so I'm glad to be back.
And Amy, I think you're the new one on the block, aren't you? Do you want to introduce yourself?
I think it'll go Elena.
Oh, excuse me, it's Elena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Elena Rudder, and I am a legislative fellow at KLRD. I will have the budgets for the Abstractors Board of Examiners and the Board of Technical Professions, and this is my first session. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, do we have any other introductions? If not, we're going to move on to committee rules. I want to make everybody aware, just some housekeeping things. Please, if you want to speak, raise your hand on the chat system if you're accessing the meeting remotely. If I miss it or something, wave big, and we'll try to pick it up as we're all trying to work through the mechanics of this. Everybody needs to be very aware that the meetings are recorded. And just so you know that your private chats among each other are also accessible by others. So keep that in mind if you're chatting with someone else, that it could be accessed publicly. This committee is broadcast live on the internet for all to see. I would encourage any of you that have constituents that have particular interest in any of our hearings to sign on so that they can see the work of our committee. Also, I think one of the great things I know that I'm very interested in is, since my hometown is 350 miles from Topeka, we will be allowing remote testimony, and it'll really give some of my constituents a real opportunity to testify remotely that hasn't been available in the past. On the website, I don't know if everybody's had an opportunity to try to go to the to the Kansas Legislative website, but our documents are on the website under our committee. The heading is, I pulled it up just to make sure they were there. It is under early release testimony. You put in today's date, and you'll be able to access the testimony that Mr. Scott and Ms. Decker are going to give today. If you don't have that in another way, I know our Alexis has also tried to email that testimony for you so that you can pull it up on another device. If you're having troubles accessing anything, please let us know, because we want to make sure everybody has the information they need to follow along. Another thing, we all have some packets here where we've got a list of the committee members, the seating chart, a list of our analysts should be in one of the folders here if you want to take any of that back with you. We also have a copy of the rules for the conferees, and then we also have the committee rules. I don't know if everybody's had an opportunity to look at the committee rules, but the rules will be a little bit different this year because we're trying to make allowance for members to access the meeting remotely. One of the rules I do want everybody to know is if we have any votes on any bills, which normally isn't what's done in this committee because we're a budget committee, you do need to be in the Capitol, even though you're remotely here, for your vote to count. So please remember that if you decide that you want to access some of our meetings remotely. With that, I would entertain a motion to approve the committee rules. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Okay,
Chairman?
we have a motion by Representative Ellis. Is there a second? Second by Representative Weigel. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those online, wave your hand. Is that an aye, Representative? Yeah, okay, motion carries. And these will be our rules for the foreseeable future. Am I leaving anything out, Alexis, that you can think of that we've talked about previously? I do want everybody to know that I intend on having a weekly meeting with the ranking minority member and the vice chair. It's on 1 o'clock on Tuesdays, is that correct? Where we'll just briefly go over the mechanics of the committee for the following week, kind of go over the agenda in addition. So if you do have some concerns and you can't reach me very easily, you may also want to reach one of those if you have anything that comes up. Some of you that are very new, and I know Amy's going to talk about this soon, so I don't want to get in the way of what she has to do, but we're not going to probably have our budget documents until next week sometime, and that's when we can actually get rolling. And our format will kind of be, we'll do a hearing with the agency. We'll try to give you a day or so to mull it over, and then we'll work the budget. Normally, we try to work the budget 2 days later. I have certain report out dates that I have to make in appropriations, so we'll set which committees we see and hear so that we're in compliance with the dates that I have to meet in appropriations. So if it seems like there's not a lot going on right now, it's really, a lot of it is because we've got the governor's budget. Our budget analysts are putting it all in a format that we can work easily, and we're waiting on that work to be accomplished to go forward. If any of you have any questions, almost everybody, well, there's a number of us that have been on this committee for a number of years, can help answer some of those questions. So with that, is there any questions? Okay. Well, at this time, then I'll go ahead and turn it over to J.G. Scott, our Director of Research, and he's going to give everybody an overview of what the revenue picture and the budget picture looks like as it stands today. Welcome to the committee, J.G. J.G., we can't hear you. Yeah, we still can't hear you. Yeah. We're working on it,
Well,
JG.
I will contact the IT guy. Xavier, can you hear me?
You hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you, JG.
I think the IT would have had to have been up here. This might have been some user error. Okay, I'm glad to be before you and you can actually hear me. Thought I would start off with just a little bit of a picture of where we were when this was going on. Remember in April, we did the previous estimates. Over the 2 years, we cut almost $1.3 billion. That was in the middle of the COVID lockdown. And because of that, those assumptions that were made and those predictions were really pretty drastically, pessimistic. By the end of that fiscal year, we estimated in April. In June, we ended up above our estimate by about $163 million in taxes, and about $82 million went into a budget stabilization funds. First time we ever had any money in a stabilization fund, but there's about $82 million, $81.9 million in there. And then as we were getting closer to our estimates in November, our receipts through October, we ended the year about $163 million above our estimates. And when it got to October, getting ready for the November estimates, we were up about $171 million. So when this was then put together for the November estimates, we were pretty sure we were going to be increasing those estimates by quite a bit. So when we sit down at the consensus revenue estimates in November, one thing that everybody agreed on, that everything was going to be pretty uncertain because we still hadn't received a lot of information on, and still haven't, on what our trade policy is going to be, what healthcare policy is going to be, what our foreign policy is going to be. Everybody's uncertain about how the pandemic's going to progress and how the uptake on some of the vaccines are going to be. There was a lot of uncertainty there, but we did sit down and revise our estimates. So for 2021, we increased our estimates by $477.2 million above our April estimates. So as April to November, $477 million in 21. It's about $807 million increase in the actuals to the current year. And then when we got to the 21 estimates, there were some adjustments that were really made to compensate for some shifts. The reporting date from our normal April 15th receipts in 2020 was shifted to July of 2020. So that moved from one fiscal year to the other. So if we were looking at a graph, we would see 21 being too low and then a large increase for 21 receipts because we are getting April in July. So we didn't get it in 20, got it in 21. It would go up substantially. And then it would drop back down for 22. So for fiscal year 22, it would get back to that normal level. Too low in 20, too high in 21, leveling out in 22. So when we did our 22 estimates, we brought that in about $7.5 billion, and it was about $224 million below the revised estimate for 2021. Most of that's around shifting. We're guessing we shifted about, $450 to $500 million. So we would have expected that to be much lower. So this is still fairly positive as far as the increases go. So there is an increase, though it does look like a decrease. When we look at employment at the November estimates, we had lost about $22 million jobs in March and April. And then when we got information in September, we got about half of those back in the United States. For Kansas, we lost about 144,000 jobs and regained not quite half of those. So we still had lost about 60,000 jobs. We looked at our average weekly hours. Those declined. We had 35 hours, weekly hours in September of 19. We dropped that to 33.9 in September for 2020. The average hourly wages dropped from about a little over $26 to about $25.90 from April to April. So we did have some reduction in the number of hours and unemployment as well. We also had some hits to farm income. There was a shutdown for some of the beef and pork industry plants. They had dropped like 60% in that April-May timeframe, but most of that has come back. We're projecting the farm income to continue to increase. 2019, we had an uptick from 2018. We're expecting the same thing to occur for 2020. The real impact of the increase is around the government payments, though, as a percentage of that farm income. It really is continuing to increase. If we go back in 21, we did have one round of the market facilitation payments that came out. That was around $250 million in total, and two rounds of the coronavirus food assistance came in, about 460 and not quite $400 million. So the farm income is going up, but a larger percentage of that income is from those government payments. When we did the April estimates for oil and gas, if you remember, oil was trading negative there for a little while. It had gone up some, but when we made our estimates for 2021, we estimated at $30. Previously in April, we had it at 25, about 26 million barrels. And then for 22, we had the dollar about $35 per barrel versus the previous estimate. So, when we looked at that in total, there's a lot of uncertainty, but, we tried to mitigate as much as we could. We estimated 7.7 billion in 21, and then dropped that to about 7.5 billion in 2022. And once again, that adjustment was around mainly the shift from April receipts to July receipts. Low in 20, high in 21, back down in 22. Really wanted to stress that that's a really strange looking graph, but that's where it would come in. Any quick questions on some of the thoughts and projections on the revenue estimates? Do have a couple profiles I want to talk about as well.
Questions? Representative Ressman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So did things get as bad as they thought they were or they were going to get? And have we improved a lot better than you thought?
I think that is very observant. I would go yes on both of those. We thought it was going to be really bad, and it didn't go nearly as bad as we thought it was going to be. It is better, but I would say that while it's much better than we were anticipating, it's not good. We still have a lot of problems and a lot of uncertainties. But we were too pessimistic, and then when we went back and looked, we've increased that quite a bit. We'll tell you whether it's too much or not enough as time goes on.
So is the worst to come, or are we doing better?
Well, I mean, some of the uncertainty that we still have are those PPP payments were coming in. Those dropped off. We had the stimulus money that came in earlier, the unemployment, that dropped off. we've now got another round coming in. We've got the $600 for individuals and then the additional $300 in unemployment. So we're really not 100% sure. When we look at where we are, we're still above our estimates for this year. So we've revised our estimates upwards, and we're still coming in higher than we had anticipated. So, it's rather confusing, and we're really not sure how much of the impact was from PPP, how much of that was from the unemployment. Though we were hearing that the withholding isn't going to be impacted as much from the unemployment increases. It is taxable, those payments, but there was less than 20% of the people that were actually filing and had their withholding taken out of those checks. So it's a pretty low percentage, and withholding is really driving our income tax. When we compare income taxes this year to the previous month last year, we're still above where we were last year. And it's one thing that the people have mentioned on several occasions is that people aren't going out as much. They're staying, close to home more. So those vacations that people were taking, those experiences that they were going to, those concerts and such, they're not going to those. So there's some theory out there that they're spending more on sales tax type of items and purchasing. So sales tax is still doing pretty strong, stronger than we would have anticipated.
All right, so I shouldn't go out and buy that new Cadillac this year then.
Well, no, actually, last month our tax receipts were up about $70 million. So we're still taxes higher than what we anticipated. Most of that, though, is really around corporate income tax. We're about $40 million higher in corporate income tax than we anticipated. And most of that's in corporate estimated, which is payments on what they think they're going to be bringing in. And sales and compensating use, we're about $40 million in corporate and another $18 million in sales and compensating use. So those two items are still doing good. Income tax, we're still about $8 million above our estimates. So everything seems to be going pretty steady still. But
it just seems unusual to hear all the bad news and we're still not doing all that bad.
That's what I keep thinking every time we get this. I go, oh, this month these receipts are going to be terrible. And right now we're thinking that our receipts for this month for January are still going to be pretty good. We're not going to see a huge drop anywhere. So we haven't received all the sales tax yet, but income tax is still coming in pretty good. Corporate still coming in pretty good. Sales tax is due on the 26th, so we'll get some information on that. But we had a pretty strong day today, so it still looks good.
All right, we'll keep our fingers crossed, and thank you.
You bet.
Other questions? I do have one question. Have you noticed the recent increases in commodity prices in the agricultural area? I mean, it's kind of been surprising on my end. I mean, that's another good thing for the near future, at least, isn't it?
Yeah, and we had talked about that in the long memo that we didn't know because it was just starting in November, and we didn't know whether that was going to be an ongoing trend or if that was just, a short-term spike. We did have both good and bad news. We heard at the beginning that the agreement with China has been going fairly well, and recently I've heard that they haven't been getting as much as in purchases as we had at first anticipated, but commodities still seem to be doing fairly well.
And just, you might tag on to this, JG, but for the newer members on the committee, what happens is we'll make our budget recommendations, and as part of those budget recommendations, some of them we may put off until Omnibus, or the Appropriations Committee may put off to Omnibus. what that is when we come back from our April break, the Appropriations Committee will reconsider those items. And one of the major reasons why we do that is because the Consensus Revenue Committee is going to meet, and what date is it in April, JG? And they will refine these numbers based upon the latest data so that when we actually pass the budget this year, you know, it's the most accurate that we can be.
Yeah, statutorily, it has to be on or before April 20th, and we usually wait about as long as we can. I'm not sure what day April 20th falls on. But you're right. I was talking about the April estimates earlier when we were so pessimistic. Then that's when we did reduce some. No, yeah, we made some adjustments, but not much. As far as budgets go, because it wasn't reconsidered. They focused more on the HEMA and other emergency items that were coming up. But yeah, we'll reestimate these around April 20th.
Okay, you want to go on to the next part?
Okay, so just real quick, when we were done with this, we had finished the year. Our profile that we did in November showed an improvement over the 2 years. We had that $1.3 million negative. By the time we hit 2021 in our estimates, you know, we had more than we anticipated in 20, increased 21 by 477 million. We were 160 million above for 20. Went from a negative to an actual positive, about $400 million. And then it was slightly negative in 22 with some real broad assumptions that were made. So the last page that you will see on the handout is the latest profile that we have. And this profile, for people who are not used to seeing this, is not a prediction of what we think is going to happen. It is solely a planning document. So if things continue as they are going now, and if we hit exactly the numbers that we were expecting for our revenue estimates, no more, no less, that nobody makes any changes to any of the expenditures that are out here for 21 or 22 in the governor's recommendations, and we know we're not going to hit the estimates exact. We know we're going to make adjustments to the budget. So these numbers will change. But for a planning document, when we're looking at this, with the governor's recommendation, she added about $152 million in receipts, and that's mainly around not making the PMIB payment. That's supposed to be made to repay an interest loan. We have $132 million that's still payable. It doesn't make that payment. That does make all of the expenditures for the human services caseloads, which are estimates that are agreed on between the legislative branch or the legislative research, the division of budget. They agree with estimates on caseloads, school finance, both, much as they do with the consensus estimates. Those estimates were funded in this. And then the governor made recommendations for other adjustments to get to expenditures of about $7.6 billion or a $767.6 million ending balance positive. We still have that $82 million, 81.9 in the budget stabilization fund. But without that, it's about a 10% ending balance. For this purpose, then we take the ending balance and we move it up to the beginning balance, same numbers. We use the consensus revenue estimates. We had that $7.5 billion. It still stays in there. The governor made some transfer adjustments, major adjustments. She, as you can see down at the bottom, she moved the 81.9 million from the budget stabilization fund. She transferred that into the state general fund. I believe there's a little over 66 million in transfer from the highway fund, which is down from last year. And the non-payment of the local ad valorem tax reduction fund. She had a couple of tax plans that she put out. that totaled 85.8 million. And once again, those consensus caseloads and school finance are funded. Stepping back for just a moment, negative caseloads for human services. That's around the 6.2% increase that the federal government gave. And by providing additional Medicaid money, that's the match rate for Medicaid, they're putting in 6.2 million more, or 6.2% more, and the state's putting in 6.2% less. So that's the majority of that $166 million savings. Because it ends, we did not include that in 2022. So we put the 166 back in, and the funding the rest of the caseloads brought a increase of about 205 million for caseloads. And school finance, 207 million. Majority of that is the statutory increase for the base payment. There were several years that were added and budgeted. This brings that base rate up to the appropriate level. Then the governor's recommendations brings expenditures to $7,960,000,000, or virtually a $601 million ending balance, which is at that 7.5%. One thing I do always like to look at is that very bottom line, the receipts above or below expenditures. So in 18, you'll see we brought in $653 million more than we spent. In 19, we brought in $343 million more than we spent. In 2020, we spent $610 million more than what we brought in. In 2021, the governor's recommendations has an increase above expenditures totaling about $273 million. And then those expenditures are above the receipts in 2022 by $166 million. And most of those receipts and expenditures are dealing with the beginning balances. So it's just spending down those ending balances or building up those ending balances. So quick overview of the state and kind of where we are.
And JG, what was the ending balance in 2022 before we received the governor's budget adjustments with the CAPERS reamortization and not paying off the PMIB and some of those things? What was that ending balance?
Are you talking about at the November estimate when we did that?
Yeah, probably November. What were we forecasting for the end of fiscal year 2022?
22, we had a negative about $121 million.
And where did you say where is the not paying the PMIB added back in? Is it the 224.4 million?
Actually, it's in the 21 number, that 152 million.
The 21 number.
Yeah, so the 220 right across the tax or the transfer adjustments of 152 of that million, 132 million of that amount is the PMIB loan.
And would we have had it paid off if we made that payment, or were we scheduled to make another one in 2022?
This would be the last payment that should be made.
Okay.
The governor recommended starting in, I think, 23, making those payments over 10 years.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, JG. It's confusing and informative, like always.
I try my best at both.
And by the way, I know that you've dealt with my inability to understand the flows on this document for years. It really is a very confusing document because a change in 1 year sometimes can make massive changes 2 or 3 years down the road. Just like, for instance, in fiscal year 2022, our receipts are above our expenditures by 166 million, and that can kind of multiply pretty quick on us, can't it?
Definitely can.
Okay.
And like I said, when we make adjustments like we did earlier, that $477 million for the increase in 2021, well, that also then adds $477 million to our starting point in 2022. So that's the exact situation you were talking about, is those bases that carry over that really get kind of confusing. So that one-time increase of 477 million gets into that, getting close to a $1 billion increase in 2 years.
Okay. All right. If there's no further questions, we'll move on to Amy. And Amy, I hope we have it set up so you can share, but I don't know if we do.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm going to give it a shot to share my PowerPoint slides with you then. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, my name is Amy Deckard. I'm the Assistant Director for Fiscal Affairs. I'll walk you through how budgeting works here in the state of Kansas. So please stop me if you have any questions. So what you should see on the screen on slide 2 is the state budget process. This is a continual, hopefully that's what you see on the screen. It's a continual process. So every part of the fiscal year, there is something happening with the budget from someone somewhere. So if you start in the middle of that oval, that's the start of the budget process. So agencies are working on their upcoming budget starting in March through September. If you go to the top of that oval, you see that agencies submit their budget proposals to the Division of the Budget as well as Legislative Research by October 1st of every year. Then moving to the right on this oval, you see the governor's recommendations. So you see that the governor makes recommendations to the legislature for the current and budget years. This happens in mid-January annually. And then at the bottom of the oval, you see legislative review, which is where we're at currently. So the legislature reviews and passes an appropriation bill or bills for the current and budget year. That happens starting in mid-January through May. On the far left of the oval, you see the governor signing those appropriation bills for the current and budget years. Might note that then that process starts all over again for both the current year and the budget years. A couple things I might note also on this table. On the far right, you see an explanation of what the current and budget years are. So the current year is fiscal 2021. So that's the session in which, the year in which the session is. It's easier for me to think about it in that it's named for the year in which it ends. So fiscal years run July 1st through June 30. So fiscal year 2021 started on July 1st of 2020 and runs through June 30 of 2021. Again, named for the fiscal year in which it ends. So you'll be considering the current year, fiscal 2021, and the budget year 2020. And for any biennial budget agencies, fiscal year 2023 also. Might also note at the bottom left of that chart is the consensus revenue, education, and caseload estimating. So JG mentioned the consensus revenue estimating that happens in the fall and the spring. We also do estimates for education as well as human services. Kind of a big picture of the overall process. Moving to slide 3, you see, as I mentioned, agencies are required to submit their budget requests by October 1st of each year. So most agencies are in the executive branch of government. The governor performs a thorough review of these budget requests. The 2 other branches of government are independent of the governor's control. By law, the judicial branch budget request is submitted directly to the legislature. By practice, the same is generally true of the legislative branch. Just a big picture reminder, the governor recommends, and that is the starting point for the budget in Kansas. However, the legislature appropriates. The governor has a budget staff led by the director of the budget who makes initial recommendations, which are then adjusted by the governor to form her recommendation. She can make both budget and budget-related policy recommendations at the beginning of the session. This is the starting point that you'll consider. Her budget recommendations must provide for a statutory state general fund ending balance equal to 7.5% or more of the proposed expenditures from the state general fund. During the session, the governor may propose changes to her original recommendations. This could be anything from a technical correction to a change of policy. So your legislative research fiscal staff analyzes both the agency's request as well as the governor's recommendations and prepares the budget analysis for distribution early in the session. That's what your fiscal team that you met earlier in this meeting are currently working on. So on slide 6, you see the basic process to pass an appropriation bill. I'm just going to highlight a couple of these items. So while you are working on these items in the House, the Senate is also working to pass an appropriation bill. So the appropriation committee chairperson designates which agencies will be reviewed by which budget committee. You do your review of those details of the budget and then report back your recommendations to the House Appropriations Committee. The House Appropriations Committee considers those recommendations as well as looking at the budget as a whole and provides a budget bill to the House Committee of the Whole. The House Committee of the Whole passes an appropriation bill, which is then sent to Conference Committee. And then those Conference Committee reports are sent back to the Committee of the Whole for consideration. And then the final agreed to budget bill is sent to the governor for signature. Generally, there are 3 identical appropriation bills reflecting the governor's recommendations introduced in each of the chambers. There's a current year or supplemental bill. There's a budget year appropriation bill, commonly referred to as the mega bill, as well as a capital improvements bill for those agencies that have capital improvements. These bills are prepared by the reviser of statute in consultation with the Division of the Budget and are generally referred to Senate Ways and Means and the House Appropriations Committees. These bills may be combined into a single appropriation bill later in the process to allow the legislature to consider the budget as a whole, not in isolated pieces. On slide 8, just comment about budget committees. These are assigned to review budgets based on designated subject matter areas. So the role of budget committees, you're briefed on major issues of the assigned budgets. You seek agency and public input on your assigned budgets, as well as make recommendations for adjustments and policy changes to House Appropriations Committee. On slide 10, you see the functions of government. So these reflect the classifications into which similar agencies are grouped. You're focused on the public safety function of government. There are 5 other functions, including general government, human services, education, agricultural and natural resources, as well as transportation. On slide 11, you'll hear about expenditures by major purpose. So the first is state operations. So these are actual agency operating costs. So these include salaries and wages for state employees, contractual services, commodities, and capital outlay. There's also aid to local units of government. So these are aid payments to counties, cities, school districts, or any other local government entity. This may be from state or federal funding sources. Other assistance grants and benefits. These are payments made to or on behalf of individuals for aid, including public assistance benefits, unemployment benefits, and tuition grants. The last is capital improvement expenditures. These are cash or debt service payments for projects involving new construction, remodeling and additions, rehabilitation and repair, raising, and the principal portion of debt service for capital expenses. So the full House Appropriations and Ways and Means Committee do consider the recommendations made by each of the budget committees, and they approve or amend these recommendations throughout the session. And then they review the complete big picture of the budget and make recommendations for consideration in the form of a bill by the full chamber. For the consideration by the full chamber, your legislative staff will prepare detailed adjustments to the appropriation bills to reflect the full committee's recommendations. And we're going to prepare summary materials for you explaining both the governor's original recommendations as well as any changes recommended by the committee. The full chamber then considers the complete budget as recommended by the House Appropriations Committee. All members would then have an opportunity to propose floor amendments that would further adjust the recommendations. Just a reminder, those floor amendments will be prepared by the Office of Reviser of Statutes. Also would note that floor amendments are subject to your House rules regarding PAYGO, unless the budget year ending balance on the profile is equal to or greater than 7.5%. After that's passed by both chambers, that goes to a conference committee. 6-member conference committee, usually composed of the chair, vice chair, and ranking minority member of House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means, meet to reconcile any differences in the two versions of the bill. When the conference committee reaches their agreement, your staff prepares a conference committee report and an explanation of the agreement. Then the full chamber would vote on whether the conference committee report would be approved. Just a reminder, no amendments are allowed at this point in the process. It's an up or down vote. Generally, at this point, if it hasn't happened before then, the conference committee report combines all of the various appropriation bills into one bill, generally into a vehicle of a shell of another bill. And the chairman mentioned the omnibus session earlier. So at first adjournment, usually in early April, the legislature goes home prior to the veto session, which is to consider any vetoes by the governor. Usually the week before the full legislature returns, the House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means Committee return to consider items to include in the last appropriation bill of the year, the Omnibus Appropriation Bill. This bill is designed to make adjustments to agency budgets. So this would reflect the impact of legislation passed during the session, to address any budget amendments recommended by the governor, to address items specifically deferred by the committee, to allow for either consideration of more current information or the availability of additional resources, to make technical adjustments needed to accurately reflect the legislature's recommendation, or to meet the requirement that the projected state general fund ending balance is equal to 7.5% of approved expenditures. So slide 18, again, the House and Senate committees develop their own versions of the bill. Then they repeat the process similar to the regular session, but in a substantially shorter time frame. On slide 19, just a note about consensus estimating. So twice each year, representatives of the Legislative Research Department and the Division of Budget, in consultation with other agencies, develop consensus estimates in a number of areas. This includes revenue estimating, education funding, transportation funding, assigned counsel costs for the Board of Indigent Defense Services, as well as human services caseloads. On slide 20, specifically about revenue estimating, In November and April of each year, representatives of Legislative Research, the Division of the Budget, and the Department of Revenue, along with 3 university economists, meet to project revenues to the State General Fund. The November estimate is used by the governor to develop the initial budget recommendations. The April estimate is used by the governor to amend the budget recommendations and by the legislature to make any necessary adjustments to the budget. Just would note, I've mentioned the ending balance law a couple times. There are statutory provisions that require a projected state general fund ending balance equal to 7.5% of expenditures. So the requirement applies at 2 points in time: the governor's original budget recommendations, and then the legislature's final approved budget for the budget year must also meet that required ending balance. I just note as a side note that these provisions have been waived by the legislature frequently beginning in fiscal year 2004. And that's a pretty quick overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Real quickly, Amy, do you feel comfortable just discussing the performance budgeting requirements that are in statute?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So the legislature did pass performance-based budgeting several years ago, and it is a statutory provision. So agencies should be submitting performance-based budgets to you. So they should have performance outcomes. When you receive your budget analysis from us, you'll see most agencies have a handful of measures that are reported. Those are generally items that the governor has reported in her governor's budget report. However, for some agencies, we do report additional measures that we think you would find helpful in your deliberations. However, there are a number of measures that agencies may have submitted in their budget narratives that they could also share with you to assist you in making your budget recommendations.
And then I also want to add one other thing, and help me with this a little bit, Amy, but Chairman Waymaster has also asked for each of the budget committees to review receipt of CARES funds and also those expenditures. Am I remembering that right?
Yes, so there is a large amount of federal dollars that have flowed into the state, both for fiscal year 20 as well as fiscal year 2021, that may have been spent by state agencies. So that money may have been distributed through the Spark Task Force via the State Finance Council approval. So that money has been distributed out. For the most part, you're not going to see those expenditures in the agency request, but you may see those in the governor's recommendations due to the timing of when some of those funds were approved. So there is, as you'll recall, a large amount that came into the state and is flowing, some directly to state agencies and others through that CARES or Spark Task Force from the CARES Act funding.
Any other questions? Representative Resman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, does the CARES money, how will that affect our budget in the future?
So if I could clarify your question, or maybe I'll answer it, and if it's not what you're asking, let me know.
Well, what I was concerned with right now, we're using federal money to pay our bills, and one of these days that money's going to run out. And I was just wondering how are we going to have to fund those same projects if we don't have the money available. Just kind of curious when it runs out, what happens?
That's a great question. So some of that funding was used to backfill, for example, salaries at the correctional facilities related to any COVID-related items. So those would have been costs that would have been incurred in some ways by the state, even if we didn't have the federal dollars. For the most part, those fundings were supposed to be items that were only related to COVID-specific things. So perhaps the purchase of additional PPE or testing supplies. Generally, until the most recent federal bill, that did not permit for very many revenue replacement options. So these are things that were directly related to COVID. So there will be some additional state costs that you will see going up in 2022, I believe is what you're asking. I don't have a dollar amount for you. And we can certainly work on getting you a dollar amount.
Oh, no, I mean, that's okay, because who knows what's going to happen in the future. I was just concerned that you mentioned some of the things that we've purchased with CARES money. Now, all of a sudden, we may have to pick that up, and just kind of wondering how that's going to affect our budget.
It's a great question, and I don't think we can fully answer that. There's too many moving pieces and parts. You might recall in the last recession, we had the ARA funding, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. That did have a large cliff for us because that allowed for revenue replacement. So we're not seeing that same kind of cliff with the CARES funding since we couldn't directly backfill those revenues.
Okay, thank you.
You did a great job talking about it when you talked to appropriations, but could you tell them just briefly what a proviso is?
Certainly. So included in the appropriation bills are provisos, or I'm going to say exemptions from requirements of current statutes or other provisions of law. So effectively, you're opting out of a requirement that you have previously passed. However, because it's in an appropriation bill, it's only valid for a limited period of time. Generally, that's only for a couple of the fiscal years, generally the current year and budget year, sometimes 1 year past that. So that's a temporary suspension of those requirements for either a policy choice or a budgetary item.
Okay, does anybody have anything else for Amy? All right, well, thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you.
Did a great job like always. So committee, we don't really have any further meetings planned for this week. We're going to probably have to hit the ground running next week. I think we'll start to have our documents to us. We have a couple of budgets that are relatively small that we usually have to get out real quick because they're some of the first report outs to appropriations. As soon as I get the document from the appropriations chairman, as far as the date of our report outs, I'll be able to set that calendar a little bit closer. But watch your emails on the agenda because it could be a little bit fluid right here at the very beginning as we're trying to hit our deadlines. So does anybody else have anything further for the good of the body? If not, we're adjourned. Thank you.